Welcome back to Farms and Frontlines, everybody. I am your host, Max Terzano. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Jessica Rudo.
Hello.
Today, we're actually going to talk about something a little different. We're writing a paper for a food studies conference later this year, and we're just going to go through and talk a little bit about our paper. Title of the paper is Farms and Frontlines, Reimagining Agriculture in the Wake of American Wars. Something to
Yeah,
that.
that's our title now.
We'll see if
I think
it
it's good. Yeah, let's see
sticks.
how it fits.
I like it. But the idea Jess, I think you had the main idea for this topic when we were kind of brainstorming what we wanted to write about and how it kind of ties in with everything we talked about or continue to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, kind of looking at a lot of the topics that we have covered and just kind of shifting the focus just slightly. We see a lot of changes that are associated with post like military operations or conflicts and industries that are supporting or in some way involved in these conflicts shifting focus and then affecting how we eat, how we produce food, the food system in general. And we're kind of focusing on that. We're looking at what we thought we were starting with was World War II, but in our research we're seeing we have to go back to what happened after World War One.
Mhm.
And some of these are neat, some of these are fun, like spam,
Yeah.
Cheetos, dried cheese, like some of these things that are coming out. But we're also being cognizant how in the US we farm, the equipment that we use, the practices that we're using, the pesticides that we're using, and I'm saying we as a general like US
Right, yeah.
as a whole, where did those come from? And gas is coming from the Nazis, like not a direct link, like right, we're not like,
Right,
but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
origins to like Nazis and the gas that they were using
Right, and that's where the
um,
pesticides came from,
is an evolution becomes the pesticides that we use in our on our lands.
which
And
might not surprise you, has negative health benefits.
I know, weird.
Hmm.
Yeah, and some of these things, like Max and I have found out, we kind of take for granted as this is how we've always done it.
Hmm.
But we want to highlight that, like, this is where it starts. This is where we are finding it starting. We're coming out of 20
Hmm.
years of conflict in, Iraq and Afghanistan with the US military. Who knows what the future holds? But if we are again shifting this military industrial complex or how we're reimagining some of these technologies and innovations to shift, if we could maybe highlight some good ways to do that, maybe give
Hmm.
some examples or lean on what we're learning about regenerative farming and what needs to be done in that area. If we show that there's still ways to be profitable, have a foot in that sector, but yet at the same time, like making the environment the best that it can be versus like stripping everything out of it, like what we're doing now.
Hmm.
Like, why wouldn't we write about that? So
Yeah,
that's where we're
no.
at.
And I mean, I'm excited about it just because in our research into like regenerative farming and watching those documentaries like Common
Yeah.
Ground and
Kiss the
what was the
ground
other
too. Yeah.
Kiss the Ground as well. We found that even though like farm lobbies were like, yes, we know regenerative farming is good, and there are
Mm-hmm.
ways to do it that we're looking into and we're excited about. Now, I don't know if they're just blowing smoke, but it was surprising to me to see them be like, yes, no, change is good, and we can actually see a way forward through that. So it would be interesting, like you said, to see if and how we can maybe influence a little bit to be like, well, moving forward, we have these systems in place. How do we best utilize them to create agriculture that is profitable and good for the environment and can have our farmers not being exposed to chemical
Yeah.
agents that cause cancer, right? For this episode, we're going to go all the way back to World War One and just talk a little bit about how the first farm bill into act, because the farm bill, if you're not familiar with it, it is extremely important to all things agriculture in the United States and has
Mm-hmm.
been since its inception. So I don't
And
know if you want to start by talking about World War One or just jump right into the farm bill, but happy to do either.
so I think with World War One, where we're going with that is it's the beginning of a mobilization on a larger scale, meaning more than just the military sector is involved. We see other parts of society contributing to the war effort. It's not going to be as big as we'll see in World War II, but it is bigger than what the United States had really had to deal with. But we are seeing, right, rapid technological innovations on the military side. The trench coat comes out of World War One. The
Oh,
wristwatch, did you know that?
no,
Wristwatch
I
is
did
coming
not.
out of World War One because you're going to perch your um, hand on the side of the trench so you could watch the time, so you could figure out like shots and
Oh,
stuff like that. So
okay.
the wristwatch is coming up.
What did they use before that? Like a pocket watch?
Yeah, pocket watch.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how that could be inconvenient.
Yeah. So there are like, you know, innovations that are going to later be applied to everybody, right? Fashion's going to take the trench coat and everybody, wears a wristwatch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then other things are going to come out of that too. So how like tracked vehicles, like what are we doing with those industries? And they're going to morph into farm equipment. It's going to become like instead of making tanks, we're now making more advanced tractors.
Tractors. Yeah.
And we do see that more. We do see that coming out of World War One.
You got
Sorry.
your German accent there. We do see that.
We do. We do see. There's evidence of that, right?
Yeah.
And that's Luna. Luna
The dog
is
agrees.
just move on.
It's not that funny.
Keep
Continue.
talking. Which is at the time considered great because it's, expediting how we're farming. It's making things easier for the farmers and farm hands. But we can look back with it with 2020 vision and see like it's actually doing a lot of bad things to the soil, and later, it's going to evolve into like less nutrients in the food that we're producing. It doesn't start right after World War One, but it is a consequence of the farming practices put in after World War One.
Right. Because the first farm bill came about with like FDR's, it was part of
Mm-hmm.
the New Deal.
Yep.
And it was originally just called the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933.
Yep.
And that was in response to like the drop in US crop prices after World War One. And it was really like trying to address the effect of both the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl on like farmers and ag markets.
Mm-hmm.
The act, it created programs to reduce like a surplus and raise crop prices. So farmers were eligible to receive like subsidy payments, which we talk about a lot because the like the wacky world of subsidies should be like a Schoolhouse Rock tape, so you like what is this? How do I get it? What do I understand about this?
Yeah.
Like,
That's what I need is I need a cartoon bill to like walk me through like how do they make these?
I know.
Do
I
you
would say
remember
we
those?
should. Yeah, I was like, we should create one ourselves, but we don't know. So, so
Just be a rolled up piece of paper, be like, I don't
I don't
know.
know. And now there's a subsidies, and that's government.
It's magic.
And so they had subsidy payments in exchange for like agreeing to reduce production of certain commodity crops, which we talked about in our Common Ground episode. Like
Yep.
people would just keep growing the same crop, which was bad for the soil. The soil never
Hmm.
had time to recover. So they're like, hey, how about you grow soybeans so all those nutrients can go into the soil
Yep.
to help make your soil not dust
Right.
and add to this dust bowl.
And we talked about too, like that's not a new concept.
Right. It's just
Like
these were like
George
a ton of
Washington Carver, like
yeah,
had all of
even
that like documented. Yeah.
they would give random people and settlers who are moving west and be like, move
Yeah.
west, we'll give you land. You can farm it. And these are not people who knew how to farm. They're just like, here's land, you now farm it, right?
Right.
Like so it makes sense how it all came about. But so they would do that, and then the purpose of the reduced production of commodity crops and stuff is to achieve parity, the fair exchange value for agricultural products, and price control and other forms of support for farmers would continue to be like one of the main function of the farm bill for the first like couple years, right? Like that was the
Yep.
main goal to get them to swap crops
Yeah.
and get healthy soil back. That was their kind of idea for that. So one thing that also came out of this, well, I guess following this up was the Agricultural Act of 1938. Very creative new
I
name
know.
for it. took a lot of, they really dug deep and came up with creative naming
Like the Paris
solution
Treaty,
here.
there's like 1,000 of them.
Yeah, exactly. But the 1938 Act replaced the 1933 Act, and this was really cool because I had never heard about this, but last time we were talking, you talked about the Soil Conservation Service,
Hmm.
and that actually came about as part of the 1938 Act, and it was continuing the Soil Conservation Act and the Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act. I'm throwing a lot of bills out, but like these are important, so just bear with me. But it was really cool to think because even today, like we just recorded an episode a
Hmm.
month ago about how we can better tend to our soil. And this is almost 100 years after these
Right, yeah.
acts dedicated to soil conservation. So like it's a whole new rabbit hole, just like why didn't we do what we were supposed to do? How did we get here 90 years
Yeah,
later? Like, what's going on? But the Soil Conservation Acts established the Soil Conservation Service, and their whole purpose was to conduct surveys and develop preventative measures against soil erosion. Then farmers were compensated for planting soil supporting crops like, soybeans and reducing production of crops that contributed to soil erosion. We're still seeing that today.
it's
Like,
crazy.
that's
Like,
not, that's like, if farmer today read that, they're like, wait, I do that. Like,
yeah, I mean, and that's literally what we talked about. Like, how do we help like put crops in the ground that are good for the soil, and how do we
mhm.
stop soil erosion? Yeah, it's
Exactly.
crazy.
So that like the equivalent of us 90 years ago was sitting there thinking that in Congress and like, oh, we'll create the Soil Conservation Service. We got this. It'll be
Yeah.
solved in 10 years.
It'll be a lush countryside.
Yeah, like we did it. And like so that was the plan for up until World War II started, and then
Hmm.
we went ramped back up production if you want to talk about that, because that was really different.
And right, so ramping back up production, meaning the US government needed American farmers to produce more um, because they were feeding millions of people that were going to be in Europe and in the Pacific.
Hmm.
It's troops, right? Mostly troops. But later it ends up,
Hmm.
other people. But we'll stick with troops. Um, there's, again, the American people are called to sacrifice certain ingredients um, so that they can support the war effort, so they can feed the soldiers deployed. And you'll see other things like victory gardens, right? Grow your own food in your backyard. Any extra ship, give it over so that it can be shipped off to the war effort. Um, and we did a whole podcast on, this is not just like fruits and vegetables, it's dairy, it's every aspect of what we're eating. And
Right.
how do we get food that is enjoyable to eat and also good for you, full of what you actually need, calories, fat, right, protein. How do we get those foods in a digestible manner? Like you
Right.
could still eat it, it's not covered in mold. Um, to various parts of Europe and the Pacific.
To say, I think one of the funniest parts of that was like, how do we get it over there? But also, how do we not make it taste too good?
Well, and like, right, the chocolate, right? I don't want you to, this needs to be your emergency ration. So this is going to taste like garbage, but it tastes like
Yeah.
garbage on purpose. So you don't eat it first, you eat it
Yeah.
last.
Which I thought was funny. Like that's like
Yeah.
one of the things they had to worry about was like we don't want it to be too good.
And we don't want them to eat this right away. We want them to eat this because they have no other choice.
Yeah, because if they don't,
That
they're
was
gonna
the
die.
goal. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is so funny if you think about Hershey's now.
exactly right. That is not their slogan anymore.
Yeah.
Hershey's, eat this if you're gonna die.
Eat this last. But yeah, but I mean, it sounds simple in thought, right? Like, yeah, you need to get food to front lines, but canning meat like was not done previously. Like, I mean, it's done in the 30s, but it's not done on like a mass level and then shipped out.
Right.
It's just things that we now take for granted that are like, oh yeah, they had to start somewhere. And really World War II is the catalyst behind a lot of those innovations. Um,
If you're interested in hearing a little bit more detail about that, listen to our episode. It was our I think it was our first like extra episode where we talk about innovation
Hmm.
in World War II with like Chef Boyardee and Spam and
Cheetos and yeah.
Cheetos and
Hmm.
all that, all Hershey's, all that good stuff. So go check that out if you want a little bit of a more fun deep dive into that.
Yeah, but you're seeing a lot of like, okay, how do we do this? How do we work with this? But at the same time, a ramping up of everybody producing more too, right? And again, we talked about milk and like, hey, we need you to do this. So the government is giving extra, subsidies, giving these things to the farmers. Like, I recognize this is like outside of how you usually operate. We need you to ramp this up. You're supporting our troops. Here's extra $5 or whatever it is, right? Here's extra money to do that.
Right,
But then when the war ends, a humongous amount of the economy in the United States is supporting the war effort.
right.
So, there's a conscious effort of, okay, we need to shift this right now, like a hard shift. How are we doing that effectively and keeping the economy from like crashing out?
Hmm.
And when that shift is happening, you're seeing again a shift in, okay, these tanks are going to become tractors. These, like we talked about, the gas that we see the Nazis using gets reworked. Monsanto, is Monsanto the company then, or
Hmm.
it's DuPont?
Oh, I don't know if they were Monsanto or when they took the name Monsanto, but
There is a chemical company that like kind of the seeds of like their product that we see today start with like Nazi scientists and the gas that they're using in
right,
concentration camps.
which is just
And like,
insane. So just a quick side note, I'm recording this after the episode because I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the chemical agent used in concentration camps and how that became a pesticide used in farming. So during World War II, the company Bayer, which you may know from aspirin and all of that kind of stuff, they were part of this consortium called IG Farben that made the quote unquote pesticide that was called Zyklon B. And they sold that to the Nazis to use in the gas chambers at these concentration camps like Auschwitz and Birkenau, which, killed millions and millions of people. The reason we connect that with Monsanto is because in 2018, Monsanto was bought out by Bayer, and Monsanto doesn't have their hands aren't squeaky clean either. They are actually the ones who were responsible for creating Agent Orange and all of the issues that came from that. And they're also the creators of Roundup, which is the cause of cancer in not only farmers but everyday Americans who use their product on their grass and their lawns and all that stuff. So these companies are just chock full of terrible, terrible things.
yeah, and like
Again,
nobody,
not used in advertising.
weird. We're coming up with all the negative, like bad
Yeah.
advertising.
Hire us for what not to do, and we can do that for you.
I think the people utilizing the pesticides, not necessarily the company pushing them, is thinking that pests are a problem and weeds and whatever else are a problem, and this is how I farm better. I think
Yeah.
that is generally the thought when using these things to begin with, not by the company again, but by the
By the
user.
farmer, yeah. Like I'm being
Yeah.
marketed this product to get rid of bugs and pests and weeds. Awesome.
And you know what I found? The enemy, mostly the Japanese more so than the Nazis during World War II, are constantly referred to as like bugs, as like
Mm,
insects, as like things you can stomp out.
mm.
So the transition to like you should now kill bugs with this chemical was an easier one because that propaganda had been used
Right, okay.
throughout World War II. So
Mm. Interesting.
there's an easy link that's being made, like, oh yeah, shit, take the
Just go
enemy out
right
with
to actual.
chemicals.
Right.
Hmm.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean that's interesting in
Just
and of itself.
reimagined the enemy.
Hmm. But then how we're eating, right? Like we talked about, there's a huge increase in like milk production that the government is paying for. We now need the American government to, not the American government, I guess the government too, but the American people to drink more milk, to eat more cheese, et cetera, to kind of, help support the increase in milk production and the farmers that
Right.
are doing that. So we're shifting how we're eating, we're shifting how we're doing it, we're shifting how we produce. All of that is shifting right after World War II.
Then we've talked about that in previous episodes, how the just mass production was shifted to different
Mm-hmm.
manners. How we have mass amounts of cheese in caves in Missouri. The dairy is turned into cheese. The cheese is stored underground. The cheese is then sold to Domino's. The whole thing.
I know. It's
It's
crazy.
another crazy rabbit hole that you can go in and, well,
Yeah.
I guess not a rabbit hole, a limestone
A
cavern
limestone cave.
you can dig into. But that leads up to like the Cold War, and that fundamentally redefined the purpose and design of our U.S. agricultural policy because it does go from having farmers mass produce to feed our troops to
Hmm.
using that mass production for soft power, for
Hmm.
using that food to export it across the world. Because now we know how to do that, and we
Hmm.
can use it in like the global South and Asia and different regions to send out food and be like, hey, look, the United States is giving you food.
Hmm.
This is
Yep.
democracy. This is not communism. This is not Soviet Russia. This is us, the United States. We're your buddies. You look at
And
democracy.
well, it's important to point out too that after World War II, the US is the only one that has a better economy than anywhere else.
Right.
So, there is some like moral, like subconscious, like we need to help everybody because we are doing better than them right now.
Hmm. And I think that's like after World War II, that's where it comes from. Like,
Yeah.
what began during the New Deal as a set of like domestic interventions to stabilize prices and like support struggling farmers with
Yeah.
like the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, it evolved into this tool of international diplomacy and like ideological warfare,
Sure.
which, because I mean, like that's what the whole Cold War is about, right? A war of
Hmm.
ideas, like, and don't nuke us.
Yeah. Mhm.
Side part to that. But the Farm Bill became like an important instrument, not just for economic support, but for global influence, which is, I think, really important to talk about, where
Mhm.
it helped to secure allies, weaken adversaries, and ensure that agriculture served national security goals, which is brings us back to like point numero uno, what we talk about all the time, which
Yeah,
is that
right.
food security is national security.
Yep.
And that goes all the way back to, to the Cold War and post World War II, where food security, not just at home, but abroad, helps with like I said, a soft power, securing
Hmm.
allies, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really cool.
It
And
is.
that brings us to the creation and expansion of Public Law 480, which I know you're always saying, oh, Public Law 480. I love that law. It's so great.
I love that law.
What a good public law. It's more, that's how you strike up conversation at Starbucks. So, thoughts on Public Law 480? Better known as the Food for Peace program, which was launched in 1954. This legislation allowed the United States to export surplus agricultural commodities to developing nations, often at low cost or as direct aid. So on the surface, it addressed surplus production at home, which is something we just talked about, like being
It's already
a
happening, right?
straight up result of the war, which continued all
Hmm.
the way to this point, and
Hmm.
and hunger abroad. So in reality, it was a strategic Cold War initiative. But by flooding countries with American grain and other commodities, the U.S. sought to win influence in regions where communism was gaining traction, like particularly in Asia,
Hmm.
Latin America, and even Africa. And President Eisenhower in 1959 famously said, food is peace, which again goes back to food security being national security, and just kind of a
Yeah.
different lens. Yeah, I just think it's really cool, and it's not something that you would know unless you're like an avid student of history or you work
Hmm.
directly on this. Like even in Congress, like when I was working there, I wasn't like directly writing legislation or anything, but I remember a lot of the conversations around the Farm Bill, and it's changed so much that like you wouldn't even know about the history of it.
Yeah.
It's drastically different today than it was when it started, than it
Sure.
was during the Cold War. Like so, this is just looking back and seeing how it evolved.
Hmm.
And now we're seeing how it's kind of in this stage being used as a tool for diplomacy as well as just assisting farmers with getting rid of that massive surplus that came after World War II.
And then something that we're always saying, like, it's just all connected. Like,
Yes.
if we're looking at this, right, we're sending food as like a diplomatic tool, like a
Hmm.
means to be like lean with us versus communists,
Hmm.
whoever, right?
Right. And I mean
Like,
that's the big deal. Like the food for peace policy helped blunt the appeal of Soviet style collectivization in
right.
newly independent countries by tying food access to American political alignment. Like we said, they see us coming in and aid is was often conditioned with
Yep.
like diplomatic cooperation and American food exports coming with implicit cultural and political expectations.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I'm not comparing the US to Al-Shabaab, but
good,
we're seeing that similar thing happen with Al-Shabaab, right?
right?
Like Al-Shabaab is the one who was like hoarding all of the aid and then
Hmm.
giving it out as it deemed to people, of importance.
Right.
So
The key difference being we grew the food, paid the farmers, and
yeah,
then spread it out. El Shabaab is just like, we'll take all that, thank you.
yeah. Al-Shabaab is also, yeah, a shadow government
Yeah,
operating in Ethiopia. But it's a similar thing where they're using food as a
as a weapon.
state building.
Well, a
Yeah,
diplomatic tool. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Food is again, food security is national security.
yeah. Anyway, just saying, it's just another example, just in a total 180.
Yeah, absolutely. But something I read about that I thought was really cool was that these efforts were coordinated with, like, obviously broader U.S. foreign policy strategies,
Hmm.
but that included support for the Green Revolution.
Oh, really?
If you're not familiar, that was a Cold War era
Oh, yeah,
push
I knew that.
to
Yeah.
modernize agriculture in the global South using Western tech and methods. So honestly, like what we're pushing for, and I hate to like say this, but like the idea behind our paper and our ideas is like a new green revolution,
Yeah,
which
basically.
the Green Revolution was where the US it didn't push, but well, yeah, it was a push to modernize the global South and the way they
Hmm.
farmed and with their using Western technology and methods. So it's really, we want to like look and have a new green revolution where it comes to different farming practices moving towards climate.
Moving, well, it's also we're having new revolution to move back to like practices used by like Black and Indigenous farmers.
So we'll call it a green devolution.
Yeah, devolution, yeah.
Green devolution. There you go.
But
That'll get
also
people
mixed
like
with
they'll,
like new technology.
yeah. So just to recap this episode, World War One happens, the US mobilizes, like we need food, but things are not great at home. There's the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, all that kind of stuff. Like they're just coming out of that. But we need more food. So FDR launches the first farm bill, the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 is part of the New Deal. We get crop subsidies. We start paying farmers to grow soybeans and other crops that will help heal the soil. The Soil Conservation Act gets passed. And it's still so surprising to me that like the focus on soil was a big deal in the 1930s. And
I mean, it makes sense, right?
we're
They
here
just dealt
today.
with the Dust Bowl, like you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. So
Not
it
just, but
it does make
yeah.
sense, but it's just shocking that we're still dealing with it on like micro levels and like
Yeah.
individual farm levels today. Like we didn't learn. Come on.
Like,
Which is
yeah,
something
the
you're
top,
always saying. Like look at history and learn from it.
yeah,
Dang it.
yeah, come on.
Come
That top
on.
layer is gonna be get blown away.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
It needs to be at least 3 times bigger.
What is this, an act for
Center
ants?
for ants.
But then World War II comes around, mobilization on a never before seen level. The government pays farmers to supply food for just an entire army overseas. We figure out new and inventive ways to ship it, to store it, to make it taste terrible, all that fun stuff. Afterwards, we shift the military industrial complex to creating supplies for farming. We see the gas being turned into pesticides. We see tanks being turned into tractors, but there's still that massive surplus. So Cold War comes around, war of ideas. We redefine agricultural policy again. We get Public Law 480, great public law. The Food for Peace program comes around. Food is peace. We use it as a tool for soft power, for influencing allies, all this great stuff. And then that also leads into the Green Revolution, trying to modernize farming practices in these developing countries. And that's where we are going to leave this. But the next episode, where we finish talking about this paper that we're writing and the goals and all that kind of stuff, we're going to pick up with something very exciting called the Great Grain Robbery, which hopefully piques your interest because what a fun title.
Doesn't involve pirates or train robbering.
I wish, but
Robbering.
robbering, train robbering. We're going to go into the Great Grain Robbery, and it's really exciting because it was unexpected when I read about it. It
Hmm.
was the US selling just an insane amount of grain to Russia after they had just a catastrophic failure for their
Yeah.
farms in the 70s. So, and like how that influenced everything moving forward is super interesting. So we'll touch on that.
Little note there.
Hmm?
Not the first time American grain has influenced world politics.
Well, we'll get into that too and talk about how important it really is. And I mean,
Yeah.
it goes back to show like we talk about Ukraine and their grain all the time, so it's really interesting to see how grain has really influenced the world just throughout
I mean,
history.
yeah, I mean we can tie like grain prices, the Black Sea blockade during World
Hmm.
War One. Hmm.
Hmm.
I kind of forgot about that tie. Anyway,
Well, they didn't have any sea babies back then, so it's much less
yeah,
exciting to
so
talk about.
they didn't hear our good idea back then of turning the Black Sea into a bowl of jello.
Yeah, how could they have known?
Simpletons, gosh.
But anyway, thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We're looking forward to finishing up with the next episode, getting our paper written. We'll post it for people to read if they're interested. It will also be available on the website. We're going to be presenting it at this conference in South Africa. Most
No
likely,
big
we
deal.
will not be there. We will probably be doing it online, but still pretty cool. And we're very excited about it. So go ahead and congratulate us and listen to the episode. All right. Well, thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time.
All right, we'll talk to you later.